Hi, this is Cora Stack here, Dr. Stack. I've been listening to the various reports about the fuel protest, and the question I want to ask here is: were Gardaí too aggressive during Ireland's fuel protest? I never saw so many Gardaí ever, employed, or deployed, sorry, to in a protest. Perhaps there was more video evidence of it, but Ireland has seen one of the most intense protest movements in years, driven by rising fuel prices and the wider cost of living crisis. I suppose the last protest we had was the huge spoil vote, campaign, and people were doing their bit in whatever way they could, perhaps to make the same point. And I believe they weren't listened to that time. So perhaps this is what has had to happen. And who's going to benefit? The ordinary Gardaí who can't afford a home, who can't afford the electricity bills. They're going to benefit now from the reduced the package that was received under this, because of this. The person that isn't paid the big money of the current head of the police force, Garda commissioner, I believe is very highly qualified. Like myself, he's very good at criminology. That should be one of my strong points, criminology. I can give him a few papers to read if he wants on sociopathy and primary sociopathy and secondary pathy in police forces, because I've read a huge amount about criminology. But we won't go into that, and he'd be well advised to write about look at sociopathy and primary and secondary sociopathy in the police in Ireland, because it's a big problem elsewhere. Internationally. But the big question now is, were the Gardaí too aggressive, or were they simply doing their job? I mean, do Gardaí really investigate? I mean, do they investigate many of the complaints that are urged to bin them? That's a question. Or they suit themselves as to what they investigate. But they were out there in great numbers, huge numbers, and doing pepper sprays and things like that. On one side, many protesters were ordinary workers, farmers, drivers, small business owners, pushed to the brink. Fuel costs surged, and this is affecting the ordinary Garda going to work as well. Living costs surged, and many felt ignored. I mean, this is what the message that was very clear from the Spoil Vote campaign, and they got nothing out of it. So this is upping the level of protest. This is the feeling that you have to do this to get, and this shouldn't have to happen. I mean, the government should be listening. Public sympathy was real, but on the other side, the protest didn't just disrupt traffic. They blocked fuel depots, ports, and even Ireland's only oil refinery, as we know, in Whitegate. This meant ambulances were delayed. Now, I would never agree with that. Hospitals affected, fuel shortages nationwide. So the Gardaí stepped in force, and this was deployed now from the top, from our new tall, very intelligent, and very highly educated like myself. I haven't read as much in criminology as he has, but he wouldn't know that, of course. They used public order units. They cleared roads. In some cases, they used pepper spray. That was the worst of it, especially on children. Critics say this was disproportionate. They argue that the government showed no empathy and escalated tensions with harsh language. Supporters say the opposite. When essential services threatened, the state has to act. Here's the uncomfortable truth: both things can be true at once. That's called cognitive dissonance. Anyway, I know all about that. I've read all about that. Jordan Peters is brilliant on all that. People are genuinely struggling. I mean, listen, did on Gordon, you call the chief, whatever his doctor, whatever his name is, did he say that the ordinary Gardaí are really struggling? Or, did he empathise with all the people struggling in Ireland, with his election against the state? I mean, is he a new dictator? And the protest created real risk to the country. Even more striking, many Gardaí themselves are facing the exact same cost of living pressures. So this wasn't just protest versus police. It was the society under strain confronting itself. And did we hear that kind of balance from, our new Garda commissioner, who's highly educated, and I'd advise him to read a paper on criminology. It's brilliant. I've just written to the authors because it has come up, and it's on academia.edu, and it's called Sociopathy and Primary Hypocrisy in the Police and How to Deal with It. And I would advise him strongly to read the paper, maybe apply it to himself. For society under strain, confronting. Oh, I love reading criminology papers, particularly but I said to the people that wrote this paper, this would be very good to apply in all public service, not just for the Gardaí, but of course the Gardaí have a huge, very powerful, but, you could say all layers of authority have a lot of power, and where there's power, there is abuse of power. The real question isn't just about force, it is this: could better dialogue have prevented the confrontation altogether, and better negotiators from the Gardai side? Or, could that's what I'm saying. Could the Gardai have gone in more and used negotiation skills rather than pepper spray to reduce the tensions? Really, but the ultimate solution lay with the dialogue with these the protesters and the government. I mean, the government knew that this was very bad for their reputation. I mean, Neil Martin is can get out of any. He's very diplomatic when it comes to these kind of disputes, and he can read the room very quickly. That if he didn't move, his credibility would be seriously undermined. I mean, he's known to be very quick on that in that regard. So the situation is less about aggressive Gardaí and more about a deeper issue. When economic pressure rises, policing becomes the front line of political failure. So I would get back to that article on policing. It's excellent. It's by Cruz, and it's the Journal for Criminology. It's the journal of one of those journal of criminology, and it's about is it the rotten apple or the rotten barrel, or is there a cultural policing? And we've heard it recently, from the various Garda, reports about the morale in the Garda Síochána, that but this wouldn't be just unique to Garda Síochána, that there's a low morale. Sure, if you're paid nothing and you're, and then, so the Garda have benefited from this strike, because won't they be paying less in fuel? So I felt that the commissioner was too strong, and he really needs to get his force to properly investigate allegations of coercive control and domestic abuse, particularly when it's psychological. I would really urge him to have a look at those kind of reports and to see can he stand over what's going on at the moment, because I've met many women who have gone into stations and who are concerned of being completely gaslighted and ignored because they don't have a bruise in their hand, or they don't have sexual and what I've heard is it's tolerated because that kind of culture is part of Garda Síochána, and that is all alleged. I mean, it is absolutely disgraceful, but I've done an international benchmarking of this, and I've looked at the Act of Coercive Control internationally, and it's this exact same thing. Women that go in without a bruise are disbelieved, in particular if they don't have a solicitor with them. They're just not believed. They're not believed. They're written off as complainers and this sort of thing, and they're not believed. I mean, this is very serious now for a current fellow who claims, or who's very well educated, and he should understand psychological coercive control, and perhaps he applied a little bit too much of it in the recent term, given how much his own force are struggling with the very issues that these very brave people went out. Now, I wouldn't have agreed with blocking ambulances. That's the only thing I wouldn't have agreed with. Emergency services, I would have let those through. That's the only thing I would have. That's where I would cross the line. But certainly, I think the new commissioner was. I think he could have been more balanced and showed more empathy towards even in his own force. And I think he has a lot of work to do to clean up his own act in his own force, and particularly with regard to women who complain about psychological coercive control and who are treated like dirt, not just in Ireland, but right across Europe and in every place. And the question is it the right policy in the first place? And what is he doing to say we don't have the resources, and perhaps it's not the right policy in the first instance, as much as my research, and he can read all my research, it's on academia.edu. If he's I have 200 papers there, I'm sure he won't mind having a look at them, and I will teach him a lot about policing, because a number of them are about coercive control and how poorly women are treated when they make allegations of coercive control or domestic violence, written off very conveniently. And what's the reason for that? What's behind it? And women are blocked. They're actually blocked from making complaints. They're blocked. And why would women be blocked from making complaints about coercive control when it's the law? Can the commissioner explain that to me? Why would women be blocked, blocked, from making complaints of coercive control?